So yes, the part finally arrived, that little rubber grommet thingy, and I've put it in. It was the clutch release arm that needed that rubber grommet. And so it's now, the transmission is hooked up to the motor, and so I guess we're ready to put it back into this. The motor is now back in the car. It's always great fun putting everything back in. Again, there's always those little hoses. Where does this one go? Where does that one go? Try and mark everything when you take them out, but you can always figure it out in the end. I just wanted to show this, which is the intake manifold. Now, you may have seen my other video about doing the air intake modification, that is with the 987, I guess it is, air box, the big air box, and then the larger throttle body from a 987 or 996, maybe, I can't even remember now, with a 996 cross tube, plenum. What I wanted to show here was that I've changed the intake pipe that you see here on the right to a silicone bend. Silicone bend as opposed to the metal one, the aluminum one that I put in the last time. This actually works quite well. All I needed was the silicone elbow that you see in blue, the silicone bend, which I stretched over the MAF tube. It's not a reducer. It should actually be a reducer from by about a quarter an inch to reduce down to the rest of the hose into the throttle body. But I guess I managed to stretch it over the MAF tube and clamp it down. All these wires I had numbered and marked, and so that I knew where they went. It wasn't actually very difficult at all putting those in. They just clipped back into the place where they were. So of course now there's no fluids in the engine or in the car at all. So I'll have to be putting in the new oil. I'm going to use break-in oil because it's got new rings and bearings. And of course we must make sure that all our tubes are hooked up. For instance, the oil filler tube, which actually wasn't hooked up, and at one point I was putting in other things, I saw it, I said, oh, it was just tucked underneath the connector was just tucked underneath. So that would have been a lovely mess if I'd started to fill up with oil and it would have poured all over the engine. Oh, you have to be real careful. Make sure everything is hooked up and in place. Just a note here, I was putting the sway bar on, and over here you'll see this connector here. This is the bolts, of course, are steel, but the suspension part that you see above it is aluminum. So what this means is that, of course, when you put in these bolts, that it's easy to cross thread them, and be very careful with that because the aluminum is very soft and the steel, of course, is much harder. So I started to do that, and then I had to take I had to tap them out. I had to chase the threads out because I started to cross thread them. While we're on the subject of sway bars, just note that here you have to counterhold this with a 17mm wrench, like that, but the nut itself is actually a 15mm. So when you get under the car, make sure that you have those two things with you. So I bought a case of Castrol non-detergent motor oil. This is SAE 30. It's non-detergent. It's not meant to run for a long time. This is what I'm going to be using for break-in because there's new bearings and especially new rings in it. So I'm going to run it for a couple of hours. I'm going to take it out, on the road and push it, vary the speed and various things, like load up the engine with the non-detergent motor oil. Then I will drain it out, throw it away, and refill it. The purpose of this is supposedly to seat the rings better, scrape off any little burrs and things that are on the sides of the cylinders, and then you throw that out, and then you go from there. I removed the fuel pump relay so that I can turn the engine over just with the starter motor without any gas going in. I don't want to wash down the cylinders with petrol. And the thing is, without this pumping the gas up into the motor, then I won't have that problem. For bleeding the clutch, I wanted to have an 11mm ratcheting wrench with the little switch on it, so I could go back and forth easily without taking the wrench off. I couldn't find that in 11mm. I have a 10, I have a 12, and a bunch of other ones, but 11 I couldn't find. So I've made a short one by just taking a regular 11mm wrench with a box end and cut it in half, so that what I'll use is the box end. It's about 3 inches long. So I had the car all buttoned up, ready to roll, except pushed in the clutch, boom, to the floor. Okay, I say, well, it needs to be bled. So I go check it out, and a big puddle on the floor. Not too good. So what happened? So I get it back underneath and pull out the slave. So what had happened is that the end of the slave had just blown right off. This is the part I'm talking about, and what had happened is this part here, that goes into push. This part here pushes the clutch lever arm, and this whole thing had let go. So I say, well, why had it let go? It was working perfectly well before. This by the way is the new slave. The other one I've already thrown it out. This is the actuator arm thingy. This is a new throwout bearing on it, and this is obviously this goes in this dimple here, and that pushes on that. Okay, and this end is anchored normally in the bell housing. At this point right here, there's a pivot point. Okay, and then the throwout bearing goes on here, and up there you'll see the hole. That's where the slave goes through obviously from the other side. So what had happened is when I put the transmission back in up to the motor, this part down here, which goes on the ball pivot, let go, and this thing turned. Okay, so that means that the hole up there no longer aligned with the plate. So why did it let go? Well, oh my God, look at this. I'll give you one word of advice here. When you're putting things together, always check and double check the diagrams. I'll show you this diagram here. Well, actually, this diagram's not so great in the Bentleys. It doesn't really show what I want to show you. This throwout bearing here, right here, this guy here, I've mounted on the wrong side of the plate. And so, since there wasn't enough pressure here, this thing popped out, and this thing slipped around, as I was mentioning. So now I can try again. I'm going to put the bearing on the right side, the throwout bearing on the right side of the plate, and let's see if it works. Here's hoping. The transmission's now back in the car, second time, but this time I'm going to lead the clutch and make sure everything is functional before I put in my all of my diagonal braces and all of the underpinnings, and just in case. Oh my God, I hope this doesn't happen again. So one thing's for sure, if you can ever do your clutch bleeding with the muffler and the transmission supports out of the way, it makes life a lot easier. Okay, so we have now bled the clutch. I pulled it back up, and it works like a charm. One shot. So, my stupid. enjoyed this video, please click the subscribe button and leave any comments below.